We are back at it. Next part of Daniel. Here we go. Let's get started. My name is Connor. Welcome back to New Com Youth, our midweek lessons. I know you guys might be a little bit confused. We missed last week. I tried to upload it. The sound was all wonky. I got to reshoot it. So we're already moving forward to the next piece of Daniel. So if you haven't been reading, hop in. We just finished chapter 4. We're going into chapter 5. It's a crazy, amazing story. So much to learn about who God is, about the people that follow him, just the history going way back. So let's jump right into Daniel chapter 5. Get your Bibles open. Get ready. Now, a lot of what we've been talking about recently is this concept of power over pressure, right? There's a lot of pressure to act a certain way around people, and Daniel's facing a lot of pressure to conform to what these authorities, these kings, these rulers that are over him, to bow down and worship other gods, to eat things that he wouldn't eat out of service to his God, right? The one true God, Daniel's God. And so he's facing a lot of pressure, and it's really easy for us to cave into these pressures. And Daniel is showing us what it looks like to not stand on his own power, but to really lean into where the true power is, which is in the real and living God that we know, that was made human and made flesh and known to us in the form of Jesus here as man, who is fully man and fully God. And so we live for him and follow him. If you guys haven't heard about Jesus, you guys are just hearing about things from the Bible, this is all kind of fresh and new to you, welcome. The stories are amazing. There's a real God that loves you, and his name is Jesus. It's pretty amazing. So stay with us as we dive through. Now, the cool thing we're going to be talking about is this word testify this week. All right, that's our main title. Just testify. And we're trying to get excited about it. And what does that mean? You guys might have heard the word of giving your testimony in a Christian context, or maybe in like a courtroom setting context. Now, the word testify actually means it's very specific for a courtroom setting. So if we dive in, testify just means to give evidence as a witness. Pretty simple, right? We kind of get lost in what the word means, and it sounds sometimes super Christianese, but it just means to give evidence as a witness. So if I ask you to testify about something, it means to bring the truth, to tell someone what happened, to say, this is what I've witnessed, and here's what I know. And what that does in a courtroom setting, it helps bring the truth to light. In our setting of talking about God, our testimony that a lot of people will say is, what is the story of how God has captured your life? How has God interacted in your life? And ultimately, how did God save your life? Testimony usually points to, okay, I'm going to tell people about why I follow Jesus, because he showed up for me in this moment. He did this because once I learned that he loved me and that Jesus died on the cross for me to pay for all of my sins and the evil that I've done so that we can have a relationship, I immediately went from doing all these terrible things to wanting and desiring to serve and love him. Your life story can be a testimony sharing the evidence of how God's worked to point to God. We're going to look at how Daniel does this. We've already seen him do it a lot in the story, but he's up again and he's ready to point to God when people ask him about it. So let's dive right in. Again, Daniel chapter 5. I'm going to give you a summary of the story of how we've been progressing. The video we didn't get to post and what we talked about in the Zoom, shout out to the Zoom peeps, hop in on Zoom on Thursdays at 6:30. But we went and walked through it and saw how Nebuchadnezzar got this dream about how basically he was going to be out in the wilderness like a wild animal. And then that happened because he wouldn't submit himself to God. His heart was too prideful. And so God basically humbled him and said, all right, you're going to lose your kingdom for a little bit. You're going to go lose your mind. And I can humble the most powerful man into the lowest type of creature. And then Nebuchadnezzar finally turns and says, God, I will worship you. Now we're moving past that, and now Nebuchadnezzar's son is actually in power in the kingdom. And the way that he's ruling is he hasn't really learned the lessons that his dad has learned. So he's kind of doing the same thing. He's bringing in all these different gold vessels to drink from, and then he's like, hey, let's make gods out of these. So we're making gods out of things of gold and copper and wood, and he's making all these different gods, and he's got all these ladies around, and he's got multiple wives, and he's living this crazy life, and not honoring God with it, and doesn't submit his heart to the one true God. So again, he's trying to be that like ultra, I've got all the power king. It's not going to end up well for him, right? So if we go, this is King Belshazzar. You say that with me? Belshazzar. Pretty sweet. So he goes and he starts to, live this luxurious life of wine, and everyone's following him, and it's so great, but he's making all these kings. Then all of a sudden, something crazy happens where, he's got this prideful heart, and all of a sudden he sees a hand, just like a random hand out of nowhere, and starts writing these weird words that he doesn't recognize on a wall. So I'd be freaking out too, right? Like, all of a sudden this hand starts writing things on the wall. It's like something out of a horror movie. We'd get so scared. So he sees this writing. He's like, this has to mean something. What does it mean? Now, this might sound familiar. All of a sudden someone needs something interpreted, like a dream or writings. He calls on all the wise people, all the astronomers, all the wizards and everything of the time, but maybe not wizards, but you know what I mean, people who have that knowledge of the unknown. And so he calls on them, and none of them can help them. Now the queen, she remembers that there was this guy who helped his father Nebuchadnezzar with dreams and stuff. You should call on Daniel. So he calls on Daniel, and he gives Daniel this promise. He says, if you can interpret these words for me, I will make you like the third ruler of our entire nation. I will put you up high. You will be draped in jewelry and robes, and you will be high honored. Now, again, for us, the normal standard that we would want to use our stories for, the normal standard that we would want to, the reason we would ever want to step into a situation is usually for ourselves. That's the way that this world typically works is, ooh, I could get this amount of power? Okay, I'll tell you anything I want. Oh, okay, that's why I'm going to use my gifts. That's what my story is meant for my own purpose and power and to grow. Daniel doesn't do that. He remembers who has the true power, who's been in control of his life this whole time, and the reason that he's put there. So let's see. We go, and starting in verse 17, it says, then Daniel answered the king when he promised and gave him all these promises. It says, you may keep your gifts for yourself. I don't need the jewelry. I don't need all that stuff. It's not what I'm here. God put me here, and I'm going to serve that purpose. He has eyes ready for this moment. You may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will be here and serve you. I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. Now, the easy way to do this would just be, here's what it means, right? Okay, this is what it means, and walk away. I did my job. I can get out of here. I can be safe. Maybe I can get something out of it, thinking about me. Daniel does something different. He makes sure that the reason, he's been put in this place is fully utilized. He says, God has me here for a reason. God cares about the hearts of people. This could be an opportunity to point this king to God by sharing the story, the evidence of what he's done, of who this God is. So that's exactly what Daniel does. He goes and he gives him the story of his own father. He says, Your Majesty, the Most High God gave your father, Nebuchadnezzar, sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. He gave him all this stuff. He gave it to him. Nebuchadnezzar didn't earn it. God gave it to him. Because of his high position, he gave him all of the nations and people of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. And those he wanted to promote, he promoted. Just like Daniel. Daniel got promoted. Those he wanted to humble, he humbled. He paints this picture of an extremely powerful king. He says, your father was given so much power and authority. He had all of the nations ruled over, and everyone feared him. That's how powerful and great he was. And if he wanted to kill someone, he could. If he wanted to spare someone, he could. He has such a king, he had power over life and death for people. That's power. So he's saying, your father was king, and he was so powerful. He could spare people, he could kill people, and if he wanted to raise people up, he could, and if he wanted to humble them, he could. That's what true power looks like. He can make those decisions. Now, he elevates and gives this picture of what a king, what a powerful man looks like. And then he goes and he testifies. And he brings in what else happened in that story and how God showed up. And he says, but when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne. This person who had all the power, when he had pride, it was removed. He'd be gone like that. And stripped of his glory. He was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like an ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and sets over them anyone he wishes. Daniel's being very forward with this new king, with the son of Nebuchadnezzar. He's saying, I'll read you your words, but hear this. This is important. You need to know who God is. I need to tell you what he's done. Because otherwise you're going to miss the point. You need a chance to turn to him, because this is who God is. He can take people away from their kingdom. He has the power, just like Nebuchadnezzar did over his people. God has power over his people. God has power to humble, to take people down if they're pride, or raise them up if they're good. He has the power over life and death. And just like Nebuchadnezzar needed to submit to his authority, the authority of the true powerful God, Nebuchadnezzar needed to. He's saying, you do too, king. I'm giving you this warning. I'm giving you this evidence of who God is and what he's done so that you can make a decision. You need to hear this truth. This is more important to Daniel than the potential power that he could receive, because he knows that that power is given and taken away by God. It's not something he has to let me make sure I grab it and get it for myself. He points to the true power and he testifies. He gives the story and the evidence of who God is. So he tells this to the king. And what do you think the king does? The king says, so he tells him this, and then he tells him what the words mean. It basically means, your days are numbered. You've been judged, and you're found lacking. You've fallen short in the judgment because you haven't been serving the king. And granted, we all fall short on our own, right? We need to believe and have faith in who Jesus is as our Savior. The fact that he paved the way. We can't do it on our own. When we put our faith in him, we are judged in accordance of who Jesus was. And he was perfect and he was righteous. And so being judged on his righteousness, we are sufficient in him. So he goes and says, you've been weighed and you fall short. And your kingdom is going to be divided and given to all your enemies. Gnarly words, but he gives them to him straight, and the king appreciates it. But what the king doesn't do is the king doesn't turn to God. The king just says, thank you for this. I will give you robes. I will give you medallions. You will be dressed in amazing things. He clothes them in purple, which is a royal color, gives them a chain. But he did not hear the words that Daniel said. He did not hear the evidence, and it did not turn his prideful heart, who made his own gods, to the Lord. And then this is what happens. It says, that very night, Belshazzar, king of Babylonians, was slain. And Darius the took over the kingdom at the age of 62. So Daniel's words came true, but it came true that night. The king had a chance to turn his heart to him, and he didn't take it. He was too prideful. But you see, guys, what I don't want us to miss is that God will give you these opportunities, just like Daniel, to share your story of who God is, what he's done in your life. And I don't want us to miss it in order to have our own power be gained or to achieve things for ourselves. But think back of what has God done in your life? Why do you believe in him if you do? What good things has he done? Where has he met you in your world, in your life? How has he shaped you, and the old person who you were? How has following Jesus transformed you? What does the old you look like, and what does the new you look like? The one that has eternal life. That's pointing towards Jesus. That's all evidence of who God is, and it needs to be shared with the people around us who need to hear who our God is. So we need to give people the evidence that God has already given you. He's given you the evidence. If you've made this decision to follow him, give people that evidence. Share your story often. Tell people the good news of who Jesus is, of who our God is, of the power that he has. Tell them, testify from the Bible. These are all like testimonies of who our God is. So share, even if they're not yours, share the testimonies that have shaped your life. This is who our God is. Point to the real, true power. Not to ourselves. Point to the power. Now in the same instance too, be on the lookout. Be on the lookout for calls from other people. Calls for us to not have our own hearts get too prideful to where we won't turn to God. We don't want to be the king either. We'll all need to be called into account at certain points. We all need to help each other. Remember who our God is, who we're serving, and constantly give our hearts to him. But share your testimony. Think about it. If you haven't thought about it before, what is the story of how God's worked in my life? Think about it. Practice it 1 or 2 times so you're ready if someone says like, why do you go to church? Or, what do you think there is a God? Yes, here's why. Like, be ready for it. We need to share who our God is. Be ready to testify. I'll see you guys later.